I have a confession to make. I love the internet, and I'm known for being a bit of a tech geek. According to my iPhone, I spent an average of X hours on my phone last week. That's right, X. There's no way I'm giving that number up. And that's something I can tell you I get a lot of flack for from family, friends, and colleagues. I obviously have to use the internet a lot for work, but I also use it avidly in my free time, mostly as a learning tool. I have an off-grid place that I'm trying to rig up, and the internet, along with AI, have helped me loads as I bumble my way through. But like most people, I am perturbed by the direction that the online world has gone. I am also, as you will have guessed, American, and I feel especially keenly the impact of the internet, online media, and social media in particular gone wrong in my home country. And I don't for a minute think it can't happen here in my adopted country of Norway too. This conversation is sobering, therefore, for personal reasons, and there are huge implications for business as well. It left me wondering a few things. As we continue to move into a more geopolitically fraught world, can businesses expect a global internet sitting next to a global AI model? Or will this too become more regionalized, with each block with its own AI supplanting the World Wide Web? And can businesses that rely on online customer acquisition continue assuming that online profiling, or social programming as our guest refers to it, will be left unchecked? Or should they be expecting some rather muscular regulation? I've been watching Jon Von Tetzchner's work with interest for years. He's been a tech innovator cut from a different cloth, always driven by his own keen sense of purpose, building his businesses in service of societal advancement. It was never just about the buck for Jon, and that's refreshing in a world where the opposite is most often the case. Here comes Jon. Enjoy. Jon, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule.
My pleasure, Rick.
So I've got a couple little points to make about you to sort of frame things up as we get started. You are recognized as somebody who's been building web browsers before most people knew what they were. You're currently leading your second internet browser startup. You started your first Opera in 1995, which was extremely early, obviously, in this World Wide Web, as we called it then, journey. Today, you're leading a company called Vivaldi that is based in Oslo, Norway, but also with a presence in Iceland, and you're from Iceland and Norway, and also in Boston, Massachusetts, if I'm reasonably accurate. You were also on the front lines when Microsoft was trying to exert sort of browser dominance in the early days. And you were also there when advertising was born on the internet, first showing ads as a way to generate revenue for Opera, and then later on joining up with Google and earning revenue by sending traffic toward their search engine. So you've been at this a long time. You were in the room when it happened and since the beginning of the journey. So the first question we'd just like to start off with was, how would you describe your early hopes and enthusiasm for what was then known as the World Wide Web or the internet?
Yeah. I mean, actually, for me, the journey started all the way back in 1992. So I was working at the Telenor Research, or Televerket, at the time, and we came across this internet web thing. And I mean, this is really early, 1992. At the end of 1993, there was 100 web servers in the world. So that tells you how early we were in 1992. And I think from the very beginning, our way of thinking about this technology and about what we were building is hey, this can be really positive. And we were just seeing a lot of opportunity and, I mean, a lot of positives. And I think from the very beginning, the thinking was, when we then started Opera, we started coding in 1994, still inside Telenor. Then we did a deal to bring that out in our own company in 1995. But from the early days, we were thinking, okay, this is great technology. Getting this out to as many people as possible is really important. So from the very beginning, we were thinking about accessibility. We were thinking about localization to multiple languages. We were thinking about then gradually, okay, how do we get this on all kinds of devices? And again, initially, the focus on the web was getting, okay, you expect it to be in English and on computers. And some people criticized us for thinking outside of the box, thinking more languages and thinking mobile and thinking other kinds of devices, which is kind of very quickly what we at Opera were doing, was to look at, okay, how can we get this on as many devices as possible? The overall idea was that this would be the great equalizer, that equal access to information and services would bring the world forward. And so we would be part of a journey of improving the world. And I mean, that's how we felt most of the time, really, that it was really a question of just let's get people online and the world would be better. So that's kind of where I'm coming from initially, and how I'd like to view the task that we're doing, that we're trying to improve the world.
One of the things, and you mentioned accessibility, that I found fascinating about Opera is that you were so focused on making the technology work on devices that were quite a bit older than your software actually was.
Now, my father is a professor in psychology, so specializing on children with disabilities and the like. And so for me, this has been something that I'm used to as a kid, thinking about how do you adapt to the needs of the individuals. And that's the way I've been thinking from the very beginning with Opera, starting with basically things like keyboard shortcuts and Zoom functions and the like to try to adapt to the needs of users. And then gradually, okay, we want this to run on older computers and not just new computers. We'll do the heavy lifting. So for people that are not buying themselves new computers all the time, that maybe can't afford it, then we need to make that work. And then obviously when we started to do mobile, and I mean, at that time when we were doing that work, the thinking was, okay, let's do WAP, which was the alternative mobile internet. And we were thinking, no, this is not how the web was supposed to work. It's supposed to be one system. And we should do the adaptation so it actually works on your mobile. And I mean, I've talked to a lot of people that said, okay, without what we built, they wouldn't have been on the internet at all. So in places like, I mean, the continent of Africa, India, and the like, this is how people would get on the internet. And that's something that makes me really proud that we were able to adapt to their needs and get them online and get them access to the same information as the rest of us.
One of the other things that I thought was interesting too about your experience was, particularly in Opera, but I think you've tried to do it again a bit in Vivaldi, is how much you focused on the community that uses your software.
Yeah, I mean, this is core to who we are and the like. And from the very beginning at Opera, we found that people were wanting to support us and wanting to work with us. And I mean, my thinking has always been we should adapt to the individual and not do just statistics to find out what the average person wants. My experience is that hides a lot of information. And part of this is from my studies. I mean, my focus was usability. I'm a computer science major. So my focus was always on adapting to the needs of the users. And my thinking was, when I was doing my master, was, okay, you can do those numbers and the like, but the real point is that you need to see the person and you need to adapt to their needs. And we don't all have the same needs, and it's reasonable to think of things that way. So that's really been a focus. Now, as part of that, we have a very extensive community. My thinking after I was done with Opera, that I wouldn't be doing browsers again. I would just continue using Opera. But when Opera went in a very different direction, the users contacted me and were asking, what can we do? And there's not much I could do, but I felt I owed them for all the help that they had done. I mean, we had built Opera through word of mouth. We had built it through basically engaging with users. We hadn't done massive advertisement campaigns. We hadn't have the funds to do anything like that. We had gotten the user base through basically providing them with technology that they liked. And again, we had a very tight and good relationship with our user base. And that's something that we've continued and in some ways done even more at Vivaldi. I think what we have there, we have a number of volunteers. We have people that help us test Vivaldi. We have people that help us translate Vivaldi to support more languages. And we have people that help spread the word about Vivaldi, that they just want to tell their friends and the like. And that's kind of how we grow. And there's something really special about that people are willing to spend time helping us in this way. And to me, that means we owe them. We owe them to see them, to listen to them, and try to build the best possible product for them. And what I'm really proud of is, I mean, we've had a number of people that have been volunteers and then they've ended up being hired. But the other thing is we've also had employees that for a number of reasons have quit and then they become volunteers. To me, we have to be doing something right when people know us from the inside, have worked with us for years, and still want to stick around and be volunteers.
A quick break from the serious stuff. If you're enjoying the podcast, please give us a like, leave a review, or hit follow. It helps more people find What the Fuck Now, and it keeps our algorithm overlords happy. You have pointed out how the really important issue is how our online life now influences our choices across very many different aspects of our life: purchasing, dating, studying, voting, and how there's a link between that and that early journey that you were on when advertising came into the internet space. So I wonder if you could describe for us how you view the purpose, opportunity, and risk related to how the internet has evolved.
The world was moving in a positive direction overall until about 12 years ago. I mean, I think, yes, there were issues. Yes, it wasn't a linear improvement. But overall, if you look at the statistics and the like, overall, people's lives were generally getting better. And that's the feel that we had on the internet as well, that we were contributing to something that's really positive. And I mean, when it comes to advertisement on the internet, in the early days, what we saw was that it would just mirror what you were used to from paper and television and the like. The advertisement you would see would be, I mean, localized based on the content that you were seeing, kind of from the perspective of, okay, you were seeing a German newspaper, you'd see German ads. You were reading a tech magazine, you would see tech ads. So all of this was localized at that level, and I think it was working relatively well. And then there was the problem that someone had this bright idea that, hey, we have all this information on users. Why don't we build a profile on them? I remember listening to the Norwegian spy chief. I think this is about 10 to 15 years ago. And he was getting questions about what Norwegian government was collecting of information. He was saying, we're not really collecting that much, and you should be a lot more worried about the private companies. Mm. And he was absolutely right, because the problem is those profiles are being built, whether it's Facebook or Google or others that are collecting this level of information, is based on most all sites that you visit. If you're on Facebook, they will see where you stop on the page. It's not about just what you press like on. It will be how much of a video you'll watch. Will you read comments on some article? And gradually, based on that, it will put you into a camp of other people. And then you will be seeing content and advertisement based on that. And I think that's where it kind of went wrong. And I still don't understand how this can be legal. Now, I do know there was a recent court case in the EU that was actually saying that this is illegal. So let's see how that all works out. But overall, this concept that companies think that they can collect information from various sources and actually build a profile on you, and that they can actually then sell access to you based on that data. What they're doing there is contributing to us being as divided as we are, because all of us are getting different information. And that's why it feels at times that we are living on different planets. It's reasonable from that perspective. I mean, whatever information we get colors our opinions of the world. And it's very easy with those solutions that you'll just be getting a lot of information that pushes you in a direction. So there's always been a lot of focus on what if my private data is someone gets access to it. And that's typically the hacking situation. Yes, that's important. And I do think that companies should try everything they can to keep their users' data safe. But there is more of a society problem when all our combined data is being collected and that you get access to us based on that data. And again, it's easy to divide us, and there may be certain interests that would like to divide us. I mean, with regards to the information that's been coming out of Facebook, where they've kind of find out, okay, what makes you angry gets you engaged. And so you get the angry content. And again, in the early days of the internet, if there was a crazy person and that crazy person would be in the corner, would be saying something on some channel, no one would see it, right? But now the algorithm that decide what we are reading are finding, okay, that crazy person gets other people angry, so let's make sure that that person's posts get posted as widely as possible. And I think we cannot understate the importance of this. There's continuous ongoing research on what's happening with kids or with others that are seeing content that is bad for them. But most of that content is not something that someone is sending them directly. It's the algorithm. It's the program deciding what you're seeing. And that program is just not choosing the best possible content. And I think if you look at like the early stages of Facebook and the like, where people were basically seeing what their friends were posting, and it would be a chronological presentation of that. And then you look at what we have today, which is very different content, a lot of AI. And
Right.
That's what we're stuck with.
You've seen the articles and the jokes about whether or not we live in a virtual reality or not, right? Whether or not we live in a simulation. And you could argue, what you just described in a way is living in a simulation that has been served up by an algorithm whose singular objective is to keep you engaged long enough to see stuff that's going to cause you to buy. But it also influences other choices. And in fact, it is a way of almost programming a population.
It is. And I mean, if you think all those years back, there was a case where interstitial ads were being put into movies, where you would see for a fraction of a second an ad for Coke or something like that. And then after the movie, for some reason, you really wanted to go and get your soda. And then that got banned because it was influencing people in ways that was not great, right? But I think what we're seeing here is at a totally different level. And algorithms will push us in a certain direction. You'll start to see whether it's videos or other content, and gradually there's an algorithm that says, okay, because people like you like this, if you watch this, then you'll watch that. And then gradually you'll go down a route. And part of the issue there is also that this can be easily manipulated, because it's basically a popularity algorithm. Now, if someone pretends to be like you, then they can mimic that and they can create bots that behave in a certain way. And by doing that, it's possible to influence the algorithm relatively easily. It's kind of like in the old days, you would have the top 40 and people would call in, and someone found a way to call a lot of times so their favorite song would win. It's early stage of that technology, but it's basically how all of this is working. Yes, it's more complicated, and yes, there's a lot more lists and the like, but it's still possible to influence these algorithms. And so from that perspective, you're deciding what people see. So whether it's just that, okay, rage and anger keeps people inside the system, or if there's someone that actually would like to divide people, both of those work together in tandem and makes this situation, I mean, this is in some ways a US thing in more than anything else, but I think in most parts of the world, you kind of notice that, and you find maybe there's someone in your family and you feel that they're on a different planet. And it wasn't always like that. I mean, you would disagree on kind of issues, but overall, how you define how the world looks would be more or less the same. But now we have a situation where people are basically living in different worlds. And I do think that a significant part of that is the ability of the system to put us into different camps where we see very different information.
So there's multiple actors here, and they're not necessarily working in concert, but they're influencing each other, I guess, to achieve their own ends, right? So you've got the platform and social media companies that have an algorithm that's trying to drive attention. And then you've got other actors. They may be state actors, they may be non-state actors, who are then smart enough to understand how they can influence the algorithm in order to start to push people down choice chains that they would like them to navigate down, right? But I think a lot of people that are sitting outside the US now are looking and saying, my gosh, I can't believe that's happened. What's happened to my good friend? Thank God that can never happen here. Can it happen everywhere? What do you expect in terms of how this propagates?
Yeah, I think it can. I mean, and I think it has in some ways. I mean, you've seen division also happening in Europe. And I think it's really important that you don't think that this can't happen to you or me. I think it can happen to anyone. And it's really a question of, again, you get fed certain information. Maybe some of your friends have started to kind of fall into the same camp. Maybe they start sharing some of that. You trust your friends and suddenly you're in a situation where you're believing the world is flat. So I really think that this is important to understand. And it's something that I believe we need to do something about. And I think in some ways we're all in part in a rather big experiment with data where a lot of the focus tends to be on the individuals, tends to be, okay, what about my personal data? But I think it's how this all feeds into a big machine that decides the content that we see, that the consequences are a lot larger. And I think people should be asking the question, okay, why have we become so divided? Why is it so that suddenly we can't talk to someone about certain issues? How did that happen? Because the point of the internet was to bring people together. And I think it was making the world smaller. And in some ways, this is part of making the world smaller, except that, again, these algorithms are dividing us into different camps, not necessarily based on location. You can sit somewhere else in the world and you can still be influenced by what's being shown to certain people in other countries. And I've seen the spillovers, and it's quite visible.
Okay, time for a quick plug. What the Fuck Now is powered by S7. We're an Oslo-based advisory firm that helps senior leaders, usually at the C-suite or extended leadership level, make sense of big shifts in geopolitics, climate, and society. Then we help them do something about it. For years, we've been sitting with clients, usually behind closed doors, trying to help them cut through the noise, challenge their assumptions, and see the world more clearly. This podcast is our attempt to open up that conversation to you too. If that sounds like your kind of thing, follow us on LinkedIn. You mentioned earlier that potentially manipulative advertising are very regulated, like your Coke in the movie theater example. How do you think this particular type ended up being so unregulated?
In some ways, it's a good question. I think, I mean, when I try to talk about these things with people, they kind of say, well, there are these big companies, you can't fight them. There's a lot of economy. You can reach your target group potentially more easily. So some advertisers are saying, okay, I don't want to miss out on that. But I really think that people are not necessarily understanding the consequences. And it's interesting because, I mean, when you're living in a country like Norway, you're used to regulation when it comes to, in particular, political ads, right? So with political ads, you can't like have them on television and the like. There's strict rules with regards to information on this. But when it comes to ads that are kind of actually then trying to influence the public, I mean, it's not necessarily trying to get you to vote a certain way. It may be to change your worldview. And there can be basically ads that are trying to do that, and it can reach a very targeted audience. And I think from that perspective, obviously, in my humble opinion, this should be regulated. This shouldn't be like this. This should stop. But I don't know kind of why this was allowed to go this far. And I'm trying to think kind of maybe someone saw kind of a positive in this. I remember talking to a politician about my concerns about these things, and she was saying, yeah, this is terrible. And then she said, but exciting. And I think she was seeing, okay, there's an opportunity for her to send very tailored messages to people Well, to me, it's kind of what you want from your politicians and the like. You want there to be a very clear message. You want there to be a singular message. You don't want that to be different messages to different people. Those kind of ads allow you to go to a very small group of people with a very specific message, and then you can go with potentially the opposite message to a different group of people, which isn't great. And I really think that they should be regulated, and those kind of ads should be basically banned. I sometimes like to see it like asbestos. Asbestos was considered to be great, right? And then they found out it kills people. And then you banned it, right? I'm not sure this was ever great, these tailored advertisement. But if you say, okay, you are able to reach your target audience at lower cost, okay, I can see certain value in that, but is it worth the division in society and the potential ramifications that we see from that? And I think most people would say, no, we don't want that. And I think most people do not want to be tracked for everything they do online. And yeah, so we need a change.
Interesting. And you said that the timeline on this started about 10 or 12 years ago. And now artificial general intelligence is by some expected to be a reality in the very short term. How do you think AI layers on top of this then?
I mean, I don't really feel that we have to go to AGI to see the potential issues. With AI, part of the issue is that you ask a question, you get an answer. Now, I think AI can be used for positive things, right? I think it's helped translation a lot for voice recognition and voice synthesis. It can be used for health research and the like. Anyway, where kind of seeing patterns works. But I think where it doesn't work is this, again, then it becomes this content algorithm, just like with SEO, search engine optimization. There would be people doing research to ensure that the answers you get are the answers they would like to see. And I think that has a significant potential of being manipulated and giving incorrect answers. So I think we're kind of compounding the problem because AI doesn't know what the answer is. It's more likely that it will be what the most frequently used answer is. So it's not necessarily the most accurate, but it's the most often given, which means that it can be manipulated. And there's already proofs that that's happening where people feed content into the machine and you can then manipulate the answers that come out. It's kind of crap in, crap out. It will be no better than the content is trained on. And then it's a great idea that they're training it on X and Reddit. I mean, you can find good and bad stuff from, I guess, both places, although I think X has gone pretty much downhill. But the reality is it will be no better than the content that is being trained on. And that's really a concern. And I think part of what I've been seeing kind of with social media and the like, okay, so you have algorithms that choose really bad content and then you try to hire a lot of people to fix that. But the problem is that you're using an algorithm to choose the content. And again, and that's where you should be changing things. You shouldn't be trying to then censor or clear up whatever mistakes that happen. And obviously then the discussion becomes what is a mistake and what's censorship. And it gets to be really difficult where the core problem is actually that there is an actual content algorithm based on what you are doing online and what people like you are doing. If you look at something like Facebook or something like that, if there's a video that you see and you think it's awful, but the way our brain works, you'll watch it, right? And you might even watch it twice, or you might read the comments. What do people think about this? And by doing that, you've told Facebook that you really like this content. And from that time on, you'll see nothing else but that content. And you'll be sick to your stomach, but that's what you're going to be seeing. And that's kind of how these algorithms work. Now, you can try to click things away and the like. And I guess my thinking has always been, I don't want to feed the algorithms, but it gets really hard.
So now we have many of these different layers of different realities that are presented to us and intervene in our ability to remain aligned and also to a degree focused on the real and important things in life, I guess you could say, right? And that ends up creating really messy societies. In a way, it serves the interests of the people that are trying to win the battle for your attention, if it's an advertiser or a political party, but in the mid to long term, it appears to be a bit of a road to nowhere. Jon, one of the things that you've talked about is location-based tracking, and specifically how different Bluetooth modes that are present in our phones allow advertisers and algorithms to have as much data about us in the real world as they do when we're online. Could you say a few things about that?
I mean, there are different ways to do this, but the basic principle is that if you look at location information, that is your GPS and the like, Google, for example, I think will store that every 2 minutes, so they have all the information about how you're doing outside. But when it comes to inside, it's kind of nice when you're inside big shopping malls. It can help you find your way inside them, right? But the reality is there are then companies that take that information and they can potentially see that you're standing in a store, potentially see that you're looking at certain products, and then make sure that you see ads for that product when you get out of the store in your browser and the like. You don't have as much information about what people do in the real world as online. And I think most of us think that's a good thing, right? We don't want to be tracked the way we are online, because online, everything we do, every site we go is more or less being collected. So why on earth would we like that to be the case in the real world? And I guess the argument is that if you see a product online and buy it in the store or the like, then you'll get the information about that so you can verify that the advertisement worked. So it's more tracking. In the old days, when they were talking about Bluetooth beacons and the like, it was more like you walk by a Starbucks, then you see an ad, get 50 cents off coffee if you could go and buy it now, something like that. That was always the idea with these technologies, but then it became something totally different. People may think, oh, I'll just turn off Bluetooth. By the way, that will not stop the tracking because there's a low power Bluetooth mode that is more hidden that you would have to find to actually remove that level of tracking.
I guess it goes with these smart devices. It goes back to that old quote: "If you're getting something for free, it's because you're the product." The point of this podcast is to try to help business leaders who are wondering, as they look out the window, what the fuck do we do now in their personal lives, leading businesses and as leaders? What advice would you offer us?
Yeah, I think what most everyone wants is stability, right? We want a world that is aligned. We want to work together, most of us. We want people to get along. We want peace. And I think in a way, in realization of that, we have an issue with how these things are working. And I think there's some tough decisions that need to be made. And it's basically saying, okay, we need to regulate this thing. I think we have to go really far. I don't think this is a question of, we need to make sure that hate speech doesn't get propagated or that you don't see things that are bad for you. I think those are subsets. And I think the core issue is much bigger. I'm not saying those things are not important. I'm just saying that the core issue might help fix those as well. There's all this data collection. There's user profiling. We basically just need to ban this. I'm not saying that you can't use data. There are uses of data that make sense. I mean, for example, people will say, okay, what about Google Maps and the like? I mean, it's nice to get traffic information. And you can do that without building a profile on the individuals, right? And you can do that without building in particular advertisement profiles on individuals or utilizing that data for content selection. So I really think that companies should be trying to keep their users safe. And given that we've seen certain large companies stray away, what happens when the large companies get away with it, then smaller companies think, hey, I guess this is the world we live in, and then it's okay.
Right.
The fact that, for example, our payment information in countries like the US, that's automatically just given away to advertisement companies. So the advertisement platform can track what you do online, what you do in the real world. It can include your credit card information. It can use your location information, including inside buildings using technologies like Bluetooth beacons. So you can be tracked anywhere you are, and all of this goes into a platform which analyzes who you are as a person and how you can be then influenced. So I really think the idea that everyone's data is collected this way just needs to be stopped. And people have said, well, doesn't it then help that everyone switches to Vivaldi? I mean, yes, it would be nice if you switched to Vivaldi, but it doesn't solve the problem. The problem is more of a society problem. It needs regulation. And it needs to basically the concept of data collection and utilizing that to show you content and advertisement needs to be stopped. I'm not the only one saying this. I do think this is a rather complex kind of proposition. People don't necessarily understand how is it possible it can have this kind of impact. I've yet to find many people that actually say, yeah, I fell down this rabbit hole. I mean, realizing that they have been influenced by what they're seeing. I think people would like to think that, not me, I mean, everyone else potentially, I understand the concept, but it couldn't happen to me. But my thinking is it can happen to you. It can happen to all of us. I mean, some people say, hey, what if we got paid for our data? Wouldn't that be the thing? And to me, it's like, okay, so you see a way to make money from all of this. Fantastic. Okay, so you want to get your cut and then you want people to get their cut and then they're making $30 a year from selling their data and you think that's going to solve anything? No, it's not. And so it really means that we need to take a step back, say, okay, this model doesn't work. Advertisement on the internet isn't bad inherently. We just need to say that it's contextual, based on maybe your location information and the like. So you're not profiling end users. And yes, it will be bad news for certain companies that really are doing a lot of this. But I think for the rest of us, it will be better. And actually, in a lot of ways, I think it will be a lot better for example, publications.
Jon, is there anything else that you feel like you'd have liked to have said that you feel you didn't get a chance to?
To me, this feels rather personal. Like I said, I've been on the internet, on the web since 1992. This is a fairly long time. And I felt really that we're doing something good. We're kind of contributing to the world. And I still think the web has been overall a positive thing. But the last 10, 15 years, as things started to change. Sometimes I'd like to think it was when Facebook went public and they changed their algorithms. And I still don't understand how anyone can think that they can do stuff like this. And then I don't understand when you realize the consequence of your actions that you wouldn't change. I did a little survey online. I asked people, okay, if you had written an algorithm and you were finding it was making people hate each other, but it was making you money, would you change it? And 85% said yes, and 15% said no. And I think the problem is that there's a certain group of people, in this case, the 15%, that would say, okay, I don't care. I'm making money from this, so I'll continue doing that. And I think this is why we need regulation if people are not able to see what's right and what's wrong. I generally like to think the best of people, and I think most people would do the right thing. I think there's a minority that will kind of not think about the consequences of their actions. And I mean, that's how it should be. It's just unfortunate that maybe some of the people that are making the decisions now are the wrong people.
Well, Jon, thank you so much for being so generous with your time today. And we wish you every success with Vivaldi and continuing to be a force for good on the World Wide Web.
Thank you, Rick. It's been great chatting with you. And thank you.
You've been listening to What the Fuck Now, hosted by Rick Wheatley and produced by the S7 team. We love that you've listened, but we'd love even more to hear what you think. If you've got feedback or ideas for guests or topics we should tackle, we're all ears. Thanks for tuning in and see you next time.